So we got to Mecca now, and we got to Mecca through the stories of the pre-Islamic Arabs and some of those materials about the tubas. And if you look at your Koran, I think I didn't bring my good Koran here, but there is a verse towards the end of the elephant. Here it is, Surah 105. And there's a little description in my Koran about the background of this. At the time the surah was revealed, many men in Mecca probably knew what happened. The allusion is to the campaign of Arberry, the Ethiopian ruler of South Yemen, against Mecca, who wanted to destroy the Kaaba, that's what they say, in the year of the Prophet's birth. I'm sure if you asked Arberry what his intent was, I don't think that would have been his picture of what his intent was. In any case, since he had elephants in his army, this impressed the Arabs. And tradition says that the elephants refused to advance because of the swarms of flying creatures that pelted the Abyssinians with stones. The flying creatures may well have been insects carrying infection. Nobody knows what really happened. I'm adding that. Only that Mecca was saved and it was considered somewhat miraculous salvation. So, this is the story, Surah of the Elephant, 105. Hast thou not seen how thy Lord dealt with the owners of the elephant? Muhammad, or the angel speaking? Did he not bring their stratagems to naught? You can have a different translation, I'm sure. And send against them swarms of flying creatures, which pelted them with stones of baked clay, and made them like green crops devour? End of surah. Now, for the believer, that is a surah. For the outsider, that is a snippet or a fragment of some information. Very poorly remembered, and unless you know the whole story from some other source, you would not be able to figure out what he was talking about. So the people who write the commentary say, well, oh, this is what he was talking about. But even if you knew the story from another source, as we do, what he means by flying creatures dropping stones of baked clay, nobody has ever been able to successfully determine so that others can comprehend what they're talking about. There are not supposed to be any miracles in Islam. So what happened is not clear. People theorize maybe disease broke out in the Ethiopian camp, maybe smallpox or something, and they're trying to do a representation of smallpox, something. Anyway, something happened that discouraged the Ethiopians, even with their elephants, and they went back. That's basically what is remembered. When I said a snippet, I really mean that. Now, a believer doesn't like that language. He or she thinks that everything is of equal worth because it's all equally supernatural. That's okay. That's their view. But from a secular academic point of view, this snippet of material is not as impressive as the Surah of the Cow, which is about 25 pages long and full of a lot of information and data and so on. And that tells you something about the organization of the Koran. And I think it also tells you something about the editing process. How was it edited? You say, well, things aren't edited. Oh, yes, they are edited. Someone sits down and puts the material together and puts it in its final form. And the claim of the historians, this was done under the Caliph Uthman's reign. Now, Uthman was the third caliph, and Muhammad died around 632. The next caliph was to about 634. The next caliph was, I think, about to 644 or so. And then Uthman happened was, this is Uthman then, around, I'm not sure I got these right, but 656 or somewhere there, and about 12 years there in the 40s and 50s. So about 20, 30 years after the Prophet's death, Uthman is killed. And so 20, 30 years after the Prophet's death, so the Muslim historians tell us, the Quran was put in its final form and all competing versions were destroyed. That is, there were competing materials that were not accepted, and Christianity also had competing materials for the Gospels and Acts. What do we call those competing materials? Apocrypha. And most churches, whether Eastern or Western, have tried to destroy those materials. But in fact, they have survived, a lot of them, some of them. Certainly some have been buried and come to life in Nag Hammadi and other places. But Muslims were much more successful in destroying all competing materials. So no one is aware of a different Koran that I'm aware of. There may be people who make claims about it, but there's only one Koran, where in Christian history, there are quite a few other books that didn't get into the collection we have. Even the four Gospels compete with each other as far as how they present the material. So there are competing versions. The four Gospel situation, they solved that problem just by letting all four in there. And so people can amalgamate them in a kind of mental process, which most people do, and come up with one Jesus story. But actually, you can't really do it because the Gospels, as I've told you, are at odds to some extent with each other. 3 are more harmonious, and the one John is at odds. In any event, for instance, John has a 3-year ministry, the others have a 1-year ministry, and so on. How do you harmonize that? Make it a 1.5, a 2-year ministry? I mean, there's no, there are, for instance, Luke has Jesus born around 7 AD, and Matthew has him born before 4 BC. How do you harmonize those things? Well, there is no way to harmonize. So if you want to, okay, we'll birth them at 0. That may be the best harmonization. Mark and John don't even wrestle with the matter of Jesus' birth. So, in any case, the apocryphal Gospels, the apocryphal Korans did not survive. The Muslims were successful in eliminating all of that. And there's only one real Koran that has come down, and that is Uthman's Koran, the one that he had collected because he was considered a pious caliph. He was killed ultimately. And the story is that he was killed over the Koran, and that his blood dripped on the Koran that he was reading and had collected. And that Koran has ended up in Istanbul, in Topkapi Museum, and you can go if you're in Istanbul and look at the Uthman's bloody Koran. I think they have it tucked away someplace, but you might be able to tip or bribe your way into having someone show you the page where Uthman's blood supposedly fell on the Koran. I've never heard one yet.
I've actually seen it.
Is it there?
Yeah.
Yeah, really? So they have it out?
Yeah, they have it in one of the rooms, and they have some guy talking, chanting or something, and it was just in one of the rooms with all the numbers.
Great. So it's there.
Yeah.
And so what it look like? Tell us. Inside information here.
Very old.
Yeah? The weather beaten, did it look?
Yeah, it looked very weather beaten. Yeah, it kind
What were you doing in Istanbul?
Study abroad with a doctor.
I see. Oh, I see. Okay. I know this joke. So you went into Istanbul and you saw it. Oh my God, that's the only one I've ever known who's seen it. Was his finger in there too? The finger they chopped off when he was protecting himself as they killed him?
I'm sure they had it in a jar. I didn't actually see.
They had it in a jar.
The only body part that I saw, and I don't know the story behind it, was there was this arm or something, and I don't know what.
That may be his arm that we're talking about.
Oh, really?
Could be. The theory is that he was defending himself from the assassins. I thought it was a finger, but it may be an arm, and they lopped off his arm or whatever. Anyway, that's about a finger, I thought, but maybe it's the arm, since that's what you seem to have seen. So maybe. Anyway, it's in the museum in Istanbul, right? That's great. That's great. Well, it gives you a reason to go to Istanbul next time I go. I didn't think they had it out on display. That's really impressive. They have it in a closed sort of
In a closed stuff thing, and you're not allowed to take pictures in there.
bulletproof type glass on the and you know, no way you could get in there and harm it or anything like that, probably.
Yeah.
Wow, that's brilliant. That's really good. Very impressive. Thanks for that. Really appreciate it. So, I was right. It's in the Topkapi Museum. Anyway, that's supposed to be Uthman's Koran. So, one of the oldest Korans in existence since he supposedly collected. But it tells you something about the editing process. Because there's no real rhyme or reason to how the surahs are put together. They're not put together historically. Some, as you see, are written in Mecca. Some are written, as our editor explains and notes, in Medina. And they're not arranged chronologically according to the time in which Muhammad received them. How are they arranged? Surahs of the Koran. You never thought we'd get to Muhammad, but here we are. Well, guess what? They are on the whole arranged in order of decreasing length. The longest first, the shortest last. That's why all these little fragments and snippets, I would call them, are at the end of the Koran. You know, it's sort of like you're sitting at a big table and you've got everything sorted out by length. You know, you put these very weighty and impressive chapters of these Koran called surahs. Surah really is a chapter of the Koran. You have these surahs in front of you and you put the arrangement on, and then you've got all these little bits and fragments left on the table. Where are you going to put them? They don't go in any particular place that you can determine. You just put them all at the end. That's why these little bits are all at the end. And so I don't think they're really, I don't think originally were supposed to be complete material. There must have been more material in many cases connected to them, but this is what the editors had, these little snippets, and they put them all at the end. Now, again, that's not an orthodox view. Of course, an orthodox view, everything would be of equal weight, but that's how it appears to an outside looking in, that all the little bits and pieces, that fragments and things that didn't really have any context as such that could really be determined were just put at the end. Small pieces. That you would do too. If you were writing a paper and you had some long bits and everything like that, you wouldn't put all the itty bitty bits at the beginning, then the person wouldn't read your paper. They say, oh my God, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. It's all disjointed. But you don't want to throw any of it away, you know, because it's important, valuable material, so you put it all at the end. What other book is organized like that you know of? Basically, the New Testament is organized like that. You say, no, it's not. The Gospels are different than Acts. Yeah, you're right, but Paul's letters are organized like that. Paul's letters go from longest, more or less, to shortest. And that was the way the Christian editors of the New Testament chose to present Paul's letters. Romans, the longest first, even though it's not chronologically the first in order. And then, as I said, the next longest, Corinthians, and down through Galatians, down to the shorter and shorter and shorter ones. And that's the way they organize Paul's letters. So you see, it isn't something that's a new procedure. It's a known way it's a known way of organization, and it does show what? Editorial activity. You know what I mean? Someone made the decision to organize the materials in that fashion. You understand that? So it is not an angel making those decisions. It's not a supernatural power. It's a human editorial committee that shows itself at work in both Paul's letters and in the sources of the Koran. Never mind. Now, as the situation in the south deteriorated and some tribes moved north and the breakdown occurred, apparently serious commercial activity on the Red Sea also deteriorated. In order to have serious commercial activity on the Red Sea, you have to have a strong central government somewhere overseeing it. Just like in the area around Indonesia, you know, what are called the, I forget what those straits out there are called, but they're very dangerous out there in between Thailand and the various islands of the Indonesian archipelago from piracy. And unless someone is controlling the waterways, the pirates do prey on the shipping. It's well-known, it was a well-known piratic area. There still is piracy out there to some extent. The Red Sea was also a very big nest of piracy. And the only way to stamp out piracy is to have a strong central government. Now, originally, you had the Byzantine government that was pretty strong, and that put a lid on it, and maybe the Southern Arabian government. But as things deteriorated by the 500s, serious commercial activity on the Red Sea was really not happening to that extent. Okay? So, that made the caravan routes and trades more important. Now, the caravan routes what were the caravan routes trying to do? What were they bringing? What was their point? They were bringing the produce of Southern Arabia, which was desirable, north to various locations, whether to Mesopotamia or the Mediterranean, Egypt, Palestine, the sea routes of the Mediterranean, Rome, and so on. And we already told you what was important down there, which was incense, frankincense, myrrh, aromatic tree resins. Aromatic tree resins that had been in Southern Arabia in the days of the Sabaeans and others, gathered in almost a religious manner. In fact, it was a religious activity to gather these tree resins, which were then fed into the commercial activity of the area and created this view of the Romans of Arabia Felix, Happy Arabia, and this interesting construction complex, waterwork, aqueduct, dike management situation, probably worked better than New Orleans, and so on. That we see the archaeological remains of, and the impression of which are left in these stories that we touched on in the Nicholson book. So, the caravan routes went north and south. Now, what they brought south, I don't know. I have to be honest with you. I don't know what was being brought south except money. The same as oil is coming out of Arabia now, and what's going to Arabia? Well, I guess Western products and money. But what was going down on the caravans, I guess manufactured goods maybe, who knows? I really can't. But there are other materials coming through this Southern Arabian traffic. Materials from further east, spices from India, silks from China and stuff. And this Southern Arabia here really became the transit point for these kind of, whatever of a Far East trade there was. From India over here and China further east. In fact, I saw a television documentary recently about a Chinese flotilla that came west to these areas and actually landed on the coast of Africa and Southern Arabia and tried to impose some military order in this area, and some of the ships were wrecked, and some of the people, I think, stayed in Zanzibar and places like that. So the Chinese were aware of these areas and did send a flotilla. I think this was around 1200, I think. But in fact, there were connections. Mostly the South India trade, which was, on the whole, what came from India? Spices. I've been to Cochin. Cochin is on the Malabar coast. And you just walk down the central street of the market there, and you see all these little sort of bags full of these kind of, looks like little root sort of things. And what's the name of that spice? It's a famous spice. I can't remember what it's called, but in any case, it's one of the key Malabar coast spices that was sent west, and they're still selling it there in the markets in great amounts. I'm trying to think of what those little pieces of root are called in Western parlance. Any of you are familiar with spices? Can name a few for me, and I'll tell you which one it is.
Cinnamon.
Ginger, that's what it is. Ginger. You got it the first one. Ginger. It is ginger. Yeah, those were kind of the root or whatever it is they extract or get ginger out of, or make ginger from. Yeah, that's what it was, ginger. And that's what went west to some extent and came up through places like Yemen too. So the caravan trade had both the aromatic resins, aromatic, something that makes things smell better, and then the other things, spices and so on. And these went in big, long, trains of sorts, and they went up, and Mecca was on the route of the caravan trade. So they also went this way too. Another town up in Jordan, Palestine, which is still famous, I mentioned too, Petra was on the route. What does the word Petra mean in Greek? You know. Petrified in English. Stone. Peter. He's Petra. He's Peter. Petra means stone in Greek. Why do they call Petra stone?
Everything's made out of stone, but the city's cut out of stone.
Cut out of stone. And you've seen pictures of it, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, what movie had this Petra in as the backdrop?
Indiana Jones.
Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. How many saw Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade? Anyway, that knight was sitting in one of those stone caves there. That was filmed in Petra. It's a really splendid place. It was so-called rediscovered in the 19th century by a Swiss explorer named Burckhardt, but I think the Arabs always knew of its existence. The West had forgotten about it. Why was it sheltered like that? What was the point? Well, the point was that the caravans needed water and other supplies, and also they needed protection from marauding Bedouin tribesmen. So the Petra people gave them this protection in this secluded, it goes through a ravine. I've been there, and it's got on both sides of it, the cliffs are like, I would say they're a good, 500 feet high. And the path is maybe as narrow as from this lectern to there, and the cliffs are like right next to it on both sides. And it goes in for about a mile or so through these cliffs. It's actually a water channel, and then it opens out into this area where you could, have refuge. It's a great protected place, and it was used. And the people there enriched themselves from the taxes and tariffs they charged the caravans for this respite area before they went either onto the Mediterranean or further north into Syria or over into Egypt or other places, maybe over to the Mesopotamia or something. So it was a tremendously important stop-off place for the caravan trades, and that's where they got the money to finance these sort of carvings of the temples and different things on the walls. So Mecca was a stop, Petra was a stop, and so on. And other places I haven't mentioned and I'm not as familiar with. But the Muslim sources claim that Muhammad was in the caravan trade and a very successful person in the caravan trade. And that he entered the caravan trade as a young boy, basically, maybe in his teens or something, and he was successful. And he met his wife in the caravan trade, who I think even may have been older than him. But she was a successful widow. She'd been married to someone else, and she was very well. She was very well off. And she, here, there's a seat, there's a seat. You can walk through this place here and go back to that seat there. Look, right there, 2 seats back there, straight down this aisle. I don't understand why you're always late. Where are you coming from? I don't really care, but I'm just having, it's just a curiosity.
The freeway.
Huh? Oh, the freeway.
The 405 freeway.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind where it is, but I'm just curious why it's a problem to get here on time for your sake. I mean, it doesn't matter to me if you're late. It affects your ability to function in the class well, so just maybe we'll leave a bit earlier or whatever if you can. Anyway, her name, the widow whom he ultimately married, she had married someone else, the Muslim sources are quite clear about that, was Khadija. And so he really contracted a very good marriage with a wealthy woman. That's what all us men want to do, you know. Contract a very good marriage. I don't know if we want a wealthy widow or whatever, but my God, you know, the bigger the dowry, the happier we are as fortune hunters. We all want to be taken care of if we can, and you know, get into a comfortable circumstance. So he wasn't any slouch. I mean, he obviously was quite ambitious and bright in what he wanted to achieve, and I think marrying that woman actually helped him a lot, becoming the prophet, as we'll see. The reason I said I think it gave him the time to concentrate on other things rather than commerce. You know, a lot of people I know, and particularly some in my family, they want to be writers, but they don't have the financing to go out and, you know, stop what else they're doing and sit down and write the different things they need to write in order to make an impression in the literary or film world. And it's great to have someone who's bankrolling you so that you can retire into a situation where you can actually do these things. Other people aren't in that fortunate situation. So that's what I mean by making a really advantageous marriage for himself there in terms of his later achievements. Now, you may say he'd have been successful anyway. He may have been. I'm not sure it would have been so clear-cut. The marriage was very important. So the marriage is connected to the caravan trade. She was very successful in the caravan trade. And she saw him, obviously, as a talented manager of some kind prior to that romance, or whatever you would want to call it. You'd have to go to there are biographies of the Prophet written by Muslims in the century after his death. You can read what how they present them. But let's go back here now to the caravans going north and south. There was really a truce period too. It was unofficial, but more or less an understanding of at least the Arabian tribes, if not the tribes up by Petra, that internecine warfare should stop during the caravan trade season. In other words, that would lessen the commercial impact of raiding, that would prevent the caravans from moving. That was really the lifeblood of the economy, of whatever economy existed. The same as I think there's probably an agreement in Saudi Arabia today, let's not blow up the oil pipelines. Because whatever you want to say, we're all benefiting from this. So we have some disagreements, let's keep it away from the oil lines. I think the tribes were intelligent enough to realize that that was the case. So basically there were 2 pilgrimages, a small one and a big one. And during the pilgrimage seasons, the raiding was supposed to be on hold. The intertribal fighting, warfare, and raiding was supposed to be in advance. And this in Mecca was called the small and the large pilgrimage. I think I think the small pilgrimage is in the 7th month, the large pilgrimage is in the 11th month. I may be wrong on that, 12th month. Anyone want to correct me there? In any case, there still are in Islam 2 pilgrimages, but the big one is the one we all hear about. I think that's in the 12th month, 11th or 12th month. In any event, oh, by the way, you probably know the Muslim calendar is not tacked to the seasonal year. That's why the pilgrimage floats across the seasons. Sometimes it'll be in February, sometimes it'll be in March, sometimes it'll be in September, sometimes it'll be in December. Our months, that is. Why is that? How come the Muslim calendar works like that and these things flow through the season?
Because they go by the moon.
That's right, the months are reckoned by the moon, and a lunar calendar does not equal a solar calendar. So what are you talking about? Well, the months are based on the phases of the moon. That's why they're called months, moons. Even the word month incorporates the Western word for moon. Even though our months don't exactly coincide with the moon anymore, because we've jiggered them. Instead of 28 days, which is basically the lunar cycle, and by the way, some people think it's the normal female cycle too, which is why females were identified with the moon to some extent. Because the cycle in a woman was considered normally to be 28 days, although I don't think all women are regularly at that number, but they fluctuate around there someplace apparently. I'm not an expert on these things, only you women would know this, and I'll stand aside on that issue. Oh, sorry, no, I really don't, I'm not into those intimate personal matters. But you guys know what I'm talking about, and you know whereof it consists and what's involved, so I'll leave it to you to decide. In any event, that's a moon calendar, which is based on the phases of the moon. And the moon calendar really is based on the fact that let me see if I can get this right, that the moon goes around the Earth. I think as well, the moon also turns on its own axis. I'm not sure about that. I think it does. No, the Earth turns, the moon doesn't. That's why we get a dark side of the moon all of the time, because it doesn't revolve on its own axis. It's just inert, and it goes around the Earth, and so we don't know the dark side, because only the light side is facing us all of the time. And they call it on the dark side, because that's the side away from the Earth. And that's, by the way, much colder, supposedly. I know, I'm not a big expert on this. But you're saying, you seem to know. You want to explain that further? No, okay. Well, there you go. That's the best explanation I can give you for that. But the months are based on that. And we know that the solar calendar is 365 days. Well, if you multiply 28, I don't know, what do you get for 12 months? Something like 310 or something like that? Oh, God, without a computer, you guys are going to lose me. 28 times 12. 2 8s, 6, 5, 2 8, 6, 13, 3, okay, 336. So we're 30 days short or so. So what the Western guys, to make the two match up, have intercalculated some 30 extra days in there. So that's why our months are not 28 days, some are 30, some are 31. And then they chucked in another thing to make it all work out, because it turns out the solar calendar doesn't even agree with the days. What are the days? The days are how the Earth turns, I know that much, how the Earth turns on its axis. I think, yeah. The seasons are how the Earth goes around the sun, further or closer. But the days are the Earth's spin on its own axis, which is why it just keeps coming up again every 24 hours. The Earth is spinning at that speed. You all know this, right? I hope you do. Otherwise, you're not much different than cavemen and women. I hope you've got that far into the modern universe. Anyway, think about it. That's what it is. So it turns out that the other thing, the 365, the solar thing, is in fact not exactly 365 spin days. It's about 365 and a quarter spin days. That's why we have what in the Western calendar? Leap year, to intercalculate an extra day in there so that we can make up for the I'm totally confused. From the quarter of a day that gets lost every 365 days. Or gets added to every, you got it? So that, in case you're wondering, that's what leap year is. And so we make the lunar calendar as far as we can, but we still want to keep 12. Why we want to keep 12, I don't know. That's pretty astrological and goes along with ancient views of things. Everyone seems to want to have 12 months. Don't ask me why. Why don't I just have 13 months? Let's see, 13, 28, 24.
364.
Yeah, that'd work out a lot better, wouldn't it? Yeah, that'll work out, and then we could just intercalculate day and a quarter or something, yeah. Let's change it. You'll never change it. Well, that's why the Muslim calendar is racing ahead of ours. Every century it gains about 3 more years. Because if you figure it out, each year is only 330, so in a Western 100 years, there's 103, approximately 103 Muslim years. I see your brains are like, slowing down behind me. Hey, I'm old. You guys are young. This should be easy for you. You just had all this in high school. My brain is petrifying, like Peter. So, I don't see why you're puzzled. You should be jumping ahead of me like a spring lamb, Anyway, think about it. I think you'll see what we're talking about. So the Muslim calendar actually, so that means that probably it goes back into itself, I'm not sure about all this, maybe every 30 years, God, I'm not sure if I got this right, but anyway, the pilgrimage will be on the same date again. In other words, it takes maybe 30 years to go through the whole cycle of the solar year to go back to where it was in the beginning. Otherwise, it'll be in the middle of March, the end of March, middle of April, end of April, and it'll keep on slipping until it gets back to whatever it was, wherever you started from, the beginning of January or middle of January or end of December or whatever. It'll just slip through those Western year months. You got that? You see that? That's why when you say, well, when's the pilgrimage? God, it's summertime now. It used to be in the winter. How come? Well, that's because it slips. And the Muslims have to deal with this, by the way. When they sent ambassadors out to northern climates, particularly like Sweden, where you have Midsummer's Night, and you were not supposed to eat during the day, you'd starve up in Sweden because the sun never really sets. And in the pilgrimage, the fast period, that is, not the pilgrimage, but the fast period, in those, if you were an ambassador to Sweden in the summer months when they had Midsummer's Night, they had to make some little bit of, something had to be done because it just didn't work. Yeah.
Well, the fasting is mostly on the times of prayer. It doesn't have to be like when the sun is at what time you have to eat by.
Well, you've fiddled a bit there. I mean, theoretically, the prayer is also related to the
yes.
sunset, after sunset. So when the sun never sets, you're in a little bit of trouble.
Exactly.
You still got the same problem. But in any case, modern minds are able to fudge. What country are you from?
Pakistan.
Yeah, well, Pakistan, there's some intellectuals in Pakistan that know how to work this stuff, but there are other conservative people in other places that don't do as well. You guys in Pakistan, after all, you may not like the British Raj, but you did go through the British Raj for 200-year period or so. So a few of those behavior patterns settled in, and there are some forward-looking, scientifically minded, and very innovative people in Pakistan. There are also some very conservative people in Pakistan, as you know, who don't allow anything to get updated. So, these are issues that have to do with, that's why I stay away from the modern period. In any event, he and I may not agree on all things because he may combine a more traditional but also more scientific view, and he may also have a more apologetic view. In other words, making everything look better or worse or whatever, good, in the sense that, we can solve that problem because such and such we have this thing. But no, in theory, the problem is not soluble the way the festivities are laid out. Because the festivities are laid out for a person living basically in the Tropic of Capricorn, are we talking about? Is that where we live, or do we live in Cancer? I forget what part of the world. But what's the northern hemisphere? The middle of the northern hemisphere someplace. They're not really laid out for someone up on the poles. And, it's the Middle East world, same as the Bible. The Bible sees the world geographically from its own perspective of the Middle East. It's not really looking at the world from another part of the world that may not run exactly like that. And in the Northern Hemisphere, you have a problem with sunrise and sunset, because of the fact that in certain times of the seasonal process, you have total darkness, and other times you have basically total light, because you're on the poles. Anyway, that's just a minor glitch in the process. Well, okay, we're talking about the calendar. Let's go back to where we were. During the year, the truce periods existed, and the pilgrimages were basically carried out during the truce period. That doesn't mean that Mecca was the only shrine, but Mecca was one of the most important shrines. And the shrine, as we've already heard, was called the Kaaba. You can spell it with an H or without an H. The Kaaba, which is the structure built around the stone that exists in this sacred precinct at Mecca that we still recognize as a sacred place, and that the Muslims consider a holy place for themselves. Now, so that was a shrine even in pre-Islamic times. And it was important for people to control the shrine because that was also a means of income. And, you know, priests in the Greek world and other parts of the universe always would make money off of shrines. You just didn't do a shrine for the fun of it. People went to Delphi, you know, you had to contribute money. And there was an upkeep involved in being a priest, and part of the sacrifice rituals for shrines, not in Mecca particularly, but other places, was so that the priesthood could have food to take home. You gave to the food, the sacrifice to the shrine, but they didn't just throw it out the window and burn it all up. A few things they burned up, but that was rare. Mostly they cooked everything up and took it home. That was a good income for priests everywhere. So, I mean, actually, the temple in Jerusalem was, as I've told my class, a big barbecue pit. Where you ate with the god, basically. You sat down basically and dined with the god, but you didn't eat all of what you brought, and they didn't throw away what you didn't eat. They took it home. That was their tithe, if you want to call it that. So all shrines had a money-making aspect to them, and still do. People hang around shrines, they want you to contribute something, either as guide, sightseer. You don't just get to a shrine and walk away scot-free, unless you're good at dodging the people who have their hand out. And the upkeep of the shrine and all that sort of thing. And if you certainly want something from the shrine, you want the shrine to give you a prediction or something like that, well, you got to pay. They're not going to do it for nothing. So there's an upkeep involved in this kind of thing. So it was important to control the shrine at Mecca, where the tribes did come. There were several gods and goddesses. I think Nicholson enumerates them. Perhaps Lewis does too. I think they were called Almanat, Alat, and Aluza. I don't know all the symbolism of these various polytheistic, non-monotheistic gods that were in the Kaaba at that time. But in any case, the tribe that claimed control of the Kaaba were the Quraysh. So the Kaaba at Mecca was an important religious shrine. Basically, it was observed during the pilgrimage months when the truces existed in the caravan trade. And of course, people controlled the shrine probably were involved in the caravan trade too. Everyone would try to have some part of this income if they could. So the caravans moved during the truce period. That was good. The rest of the people maybe went and visited shrines and things. Or just sat at home, watched TV or whatever. The equivalent of TV. No raiding at that time. In any event, Quraysh were the custodians of the Kaaba in theory. Now, the Quraysh are considered to be the Prophet's tribe. The Prophet comes from one of the branches of the Quraysh tribe. Actually, not the principal branch, a lesser branch, which may explain his, not outcast status, but the fact that he had to scratch more for a living than someone who would be in one of the principal clans. He had to get out there and work, even though he was from an important tribe, but he wasn't the principal clans of that important tribe. Now, that important tribe, the principal clans and its leadership, ran the city of Mecca such as it was. Can't tell how big it was, but Mecca is the perfect place for an Arabian prophet to come from. He has all the right credentials, except he wasn't from the principal clan. Mecca is an independent entity. It's not under northern control from Syria and Iraq, which some of the northern, as we'll see when we study the poetry, kingdoms were. Some of the poets who come from these northern buffer kingdoms and then on the Syrian-Iraq border were under the control of more powerful governments further north and east. It wasn't under the control of the Byzantines. The Ethiopians failed to take it in the Abraha campaign, according to our sources. So it's perfect. It's an independent city-state, you might call it, although I don't know how big a city-state you'd say it was. And then, as well, the Quraysh are the central religious tribal group that deals with shrine management and so on. So he comes from totally independent Arab area and from the tribe that is the religious custodian of that particular precinct and area. I mean, how much better situated could you be? That's about as well situated as you can be to be a charismatic leader of the people who are coming and going through those areas. If he came from some desert encampment out in Nowheresville, he could have a probably more difficult time achieving the success that he was able to achieve in his lifetime. It wouldn't be such a simple matter, perhaps, to come from an outlying area and a tribal group of not very much prestige or as well connected as the Quraysh. Is that point appreciated? Okay? So I think that's perfect for an Arabian prophet to come from Mecca. What's the only disadvantage he really has? That his tribe, that his clan is not the principal Meccan, that is not the principal Quraysh clan. It's a secondary Quraysh clan. And that he's always complaining about and he's always having trouble about, and that is a big issue. That's the only really disadvantage that he suffers under to achieve the things that he wants to achieve. His conflict with the Meccan leaders, that is the principal leaders of the clans within the Quraysh tribe. You know, tribes usually have clans which are connected to each other, loosely connected to each other, lesser tribes, and then clans have septs. You know, a smaller division of the clan centering around your immediate family would be what we would call a sept, S-E-P-T, if you want to call it, if you want to write that. I can't name you all of the different clans, but one of the important, the Prophet's clan were the Banu Hashim. Hashim means sons of. Banu means sons of. I'll tell you who Hashim is in a minute. And by the way, you see, I know it's Hashim, so I put the accent there. Some words I know the accent, some I don't. It's not Hashim. If it were Hashim, I'd put the accent over the I. It's Hashim, I put the accent over the A. Stop a minute. How many have ever been in the Middle East? You have, some. How many have listened to the radio from the Middle East? You ever hear the trumpets sound on Radio Jordan? And you hear that, this is the Mamlakati, Urdaniyati, Hashimiyati. What's coming out, blaring out of Radio Jordan about every hour? You've obviously heard it. This is the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. Every hour. Trumpets blaring. Or like BBC or something. I don't know what the music they play on CNN. It's usually pretty gross. Larry King and that weird woman that they have now on Nancy Graceless. Yeah, the devil lady. I don't know. They say she's popular. It's hard for me to believe. Are there really people who want to listen to that every night? God, it's a sad situation. People want to listen to that every night. I have to say. That's just a personal comment, by the way. I don't want to hurt your feelings if you're an addict of this graceless person. But be that as it may, You know what theme songs sound like. Yeah, that's what you get. And what are they announcing when they say, this is the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan? What are they announcing? The Hashemite tells you that they are saying that they are the prophet's clan, that their leaders are descended from the prophet's clan, and therefore they have some rights as far as things go in the pecking order of Islamic civilization. And they want you to know that they're of the prophet's descendants, or maybe not his personal descendants, but descendants of people who are related to him within his clan. You see, to say you're Hashemite doesn't mean you're direct from the prophet, although I think they claim to be direct. It means that you're a descendant of his close relatives or people within his clan. Anyone who is of the Hashem clan, they don't always have to be the prophet didn't have any male descendants, as it turns out, that are recognized, some that claim descendants. So anyway, but the real big clan, you can sometimes spell this with an O or a U. I'll at the moment spell it with an O, but another time I might, when we're speaking about the Umayyads, who are usually spelled like this, I'll spell with a U. The Umayyad was really the principal clan. That's where the big leadership came from. And as we see in the history of Islam, after a lot of struggle, they're going to reassert themselves later under Islam in the first caliphate. They're the principal Quraysh tribal clan. And the Prophet doesn't get along too well with them. And their leaders, he doesn't like too much. He doesn't even like some of the people in his own clan. I'll read you another little snippet here that's an attack on someone in his own clan that he thinks hasn't shown him enough respect, hasn't supported him enough, and actually has been a kind of like a backslider, even a traitor. And so he basically is going to put a curse on this person, or curse them. I think I'll find this one. It's called, let me see if I can find it here. It's called palm fiber. This is just like the elephant one. It's Surah 112. Another one of these snippets at the end. In the name of Allah, beneficent, the merciful. The power of Abu Lahab will perish, and he will perish. His wealth and gains will not survive or exempt him, and he will be plunged into hellfire. And his wife, the wood carrier, will have put upon her neck a halter of palm fiber. That's the end of the story. Now, for a Muslim, that's fine, but for an outsider, that's a pretty odd piece of material. It looks like a fragment again, because it doesn't tell us what's going on here. And you need the commentators to tell you basically what's going on. But even with the commentators, Muhammad comes across as quite an unpleasant chap. If that's authentically from him, I mean, I don't think that's the angel talking there. He's quite peeved about something, isn't he? And he's basically putting a curse on this woman, or saying, you know, go to hell or something like that to them. He's not happy with them. It turns out that Abu Lahab is one of his uncles from within the Banu Hashim group, and he hasn't supported him sufficiently enough, and has shown himself to be, not given him sanctuary, and has shown himself to be a very unreliable clan relative, and therefore he has come in for this sort of ire and abuse. Okay? I like those snippets like that. They reveal the character of the person if they're authentic, and I don't say anything to wrong. I don't say anything to say they're not authentic. And that sounds like I wouldn't want to go on the wrong side of this guy. He's not going to kiss you on the left cheek. If he slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other cheek, right? No, that's not what's coming through here. Okay? That's not what this prophet is all about. Not as he comes through these passages anyway. He might be leavened in later materials that are ascribed to him, but if this is him, then he's a rough, tough guy. And I'll be careful with him. Let me tell you, I'll be careful. Because he's not just a poet, and he did not have a halo around his head. He's a man of this world who's fighting in this world and a struggler and so on. So that's another little bit within the clan. So his enemies are not just within the clan. The leader of the Umayyads was a person called Abu Sufyan. He really was the head of the Meccan aristocracy, and the Prophet does not get along with that individual, Abu Sufyan. Abu in Arabic is a word that's used to name you, but it really means father of. Ibn Banu means son of, Abu means father of. So for instance, you know, in Yasser Arafat's entourage, we always hear, oh, the intimate name, he says, so this is Abu Ammar. This is Abu Ammar. And it turns out to be that it's really, what's the new prime minister name of the Palestinians? What's he called? You know? Whatever his name is. That's who it is. But that's his intimate name. Because you're known by your close companions by the name of your first son. Theoretically, you have a first son. I don't know anyone who's known by the name of his first daughter, Abu Fatim. I've never heard that. It's always Abu first son's name. And I lived in the Middle East, and one of the fellows that was very close to me that was very useful and helpful to me in all of my living there, and I almost couldn't live without his, you know, caring for me and my wife and my family and so on. His name was Abu Muhammad, because his first son's name was Muhammad, but his real name was Hijazi. His real name was Hijazi, but everyone called him Abu Muhammad. No one knew that his real name was Hijazi. Everyone had forgotten that. In fact, I think his tribal name was also Hijazi, and he was Hijazi. But the point is, no one ever called him Hijazi. Everyone called him Abu Muhammad after his first son's name. And I was called, after my first son's name, they used to call me Abu Imran, because I like to play around with, I gave my kid a middle name from the Moses family line just for fun, and then they knew that he was in the Koran, so they would kid around and call me Abu Imran after the middle name of one of my kids, you know. But, because that was my oldest kid, he had a middle name there, I was having fun there. So, but in any case, if someone from Muslim, particularly, I don't know how much strong it is in Pakistan, but certainly in Arabic-speaking areas, you're often known by the name of your oldest son. I don't know about Pakistan about that. Probably not as
We
strong.
usually have the last name is usually the family name,
Yeah.
like the father's name.
Yeah.
But in my case, it's not.
Yeah, but I mean, this is more of an Arab custom than an Islamic custom. As such.
Yeah.
That's where you get all these out. So Lahab is actually, he'd be the father of Lahab. So actually we know quite a few of the people in Muhammad's clan. So we have Muhammad, and then we have, I mean, quite a few of them. That doesn't mean they're brothers, but they're in the same clan. This is an uncle anyway, Abu Lahab. And then there is let's see, Ali's father is named what? You know the father of Ali, what his name was? Ali ibn, anyway, there are two other people that are known because Ali was close to the Prophet and his father protected the Prophet. And then there was the grandfather, their names will come to me presently, but they're pretty well known. So we can actually pick up quite a lot of names in the Prophet's clan. Ultimately, the next dynasty after the Umayyads is named after another uncle of the Prophet. So they were trying to get into Ali's father was Abu Talib. Let me see if I can get this now. Abu Talib. So Ali, who was the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law, as it turns out, is known as Ali ibn Abi Talib. And there was another fellow who was Abu Talib's father. He was called Abdul Muttalib. That would be the Prophet's grandfather. I'll show you why this is important in a moment. So we can fill in quite a few names in this Banu Hashim genealogy. Well, Hashim probably is the father of Abdul Muttalib. So Abdul Muttalib is the grandfather of the Prophet, and Hashim will probably be the great-grandfather of the Prophet. And that's the way things work. If you're doing genealogies, you want to get a person up here who will embrace all the cousins, uncles, aunts, and fairly not too distant relatives, fairly close relatives. To do that, you have to go back several generations. So you have to get the descendants of someone, either your grandfather or great-grandfather. The Hebrews do it in their genealogies. Eber is in the genealogy, as we saw last night. Eber is in the genealogy from Noah down to Abraham, and he's around 5 generations back from Abraham. And so he would be, all the sons of Eber are obviously considered to be Hebrews. In this case, all the sons of, or the descendants of Hashem are Hashemites. So you get everyone in, you go back several generations, you call the clan by the name of the great-grandfather, the great-great-grandfather, and then it becomes the Banu Hashim, the sons of Hashem. The Israelites are the same thing. Who are they? They're the sons of Israel. You want to get in all the 12 tribes and all their descendants, you go all the way back to Israel. Most in Hebrew genealogies don't go back to Abraham. Go back to Israel, Jacob. He's considered to be the father of the Jewish, not just the Jewish, the 12 tribes. But as usual, 12 is the number, and the other tribes evaporate over time. You've only got the one tribe, Judea, David's tribe, the Jews, Judeans left. So we consider Jacob, Israel, the father of the Jewish people, but it's really only the father of one tribe of the 12. The rest we call Israelites, the sons of Israel. Jacob had a name change, if you recall in the scripture. But that's how it's done there. So Ishmaelites, they're all the sons of Ishmael. Midianites, they're all the sons of Midian. And so you go back to an eponymous grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, if you want to reckon clan or tribal affiliation. In this case, we're only reckoning clan affiliation. So we're only going back 2 or 3 generations into an individual who would encompass this particular clan. Okay, so that gives you the Prophet's background, a lesser Meccan clan. Now, I think we'll finish this up in a moment. Let me just see if we can keep going and get us into the other surahs of the Quran. What happens is that since the caravan trade is important, the Meccans are involved in the caravan trade. Muhammad is born into a clan that is connected to the caravan trade. He embarks on the caravan trade with his uncle Abu Talib and his grandfather Abdul Muttalib. The problem is he is orphaned when he is young. Muhammad's father, I think, was called Abdullah. Abdullah. Now that's a very odd name because in Arabic, Abdullah means Ebed, like in Hebrew, Ebed Yahweh, the servant of Yahweh, the servant of God. Abd is, in Arabic, is Ebed in Hebrew. Abd is slave, servant of, Ebed, same. All Semitic languages basically are the same. Just variations on the vowels and a little bit of the consonants, but the words are more or less, just like French and Spanish and Italian, more or less, all the words sound the same, slightly different accents and variations on the same thing. So this means servant of Allah. That's odd. I didn't think Allah was a big guy until Muhammad began to announce him. How come his father's already called a servant of Allah? How come his name embodies the whole idea of being a servant of God, of Allah? I always found that very strange. I don't know what the answer is. unless it shows there's a tradition of this sort of activity in his family that's already going on for some time. It's not a new tradition with him. And there's an implication of that. To my mind, there's an implication of that with that name. Why else would he have a name like that unless it's not really his name and it was just made up? And then on to his mother is sort of Amina. Or I guess, is it Amina? How do you pronounce it?
Amina.
Yeah, it's Amina. The accent's over the A, huh? Yeah, it's a long, I always get that mixed up. But anyway, it actually means to believe, to be a believer. And there's another one that, I know it's his mother's name, but it just is too perfect. Or somewhat perfect that one wants to know what's actually going on. How come Abdullah is married to Amina? The servant of God is married to someone who's called a believer. It's just something more lurks beneath the surface there. I obviously can't go any further than that. Anyway, his father is said to have died before he was born. For some reason, somehow, I don't know what the details would be. And his mother dies when he basically around 6 years old. These according to the biographies of the Prophet. That's why even in the Koran, the Prophet is very interested in orphans, the plight of widows and orphans. His mother was a widow, and he ultimately was an orphan. So he's always going on about to the widow be kind, to the orphan protect, and so on. Numerous surahs, there is that refrain in the surahs, which reflects something of his personal life, but not just his. If you look at the Old Testament, the Bible laws, you always see in Leviticus and those places concern for widows and orphans. And you can look at those books like Numbers, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and so on, and you'll see a similar refrain. So it isn't not necessarily just his experience, but also the experience of those books that preceded him in the Middle East and similar religious tradition that he is, if you like, plugging into or becoming part of. So I'm not sure if it just reflects his own life or if it also reflects the heritage of that concern in the previous literature that was already permeating this area. You'll have to make that decision yourself. In any case, he is an orphan. And that's what I mean. He comes under originally the protection of his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib. But then later on, when his grandfather dies, he comes under the protection of his uncle, Abu Talib. I think, funnily enough, Ali does not seem to be Abu Talib's first son. Ali is the son of Abu Talib, but Talib would be his first son, whoever Talib was. I don't have any information about Talib. Why are we making a fuss about Ali? Because ultimately, who does Ali become the hero of? Well, when the history finally unravels, as we shall proceed through it all, it unravels into Sunnis and Shiites to some extent, and that's what we're seeing in Iraq today. And the Shiites get their name from being called the Party of Ali, that they hold Ali to be the heroic figure after the Prophet par excellence. And they feel that Ali is the first teacher, the first imam. So Ali is always important to keep an eye on, and as I said, he's also the father of the Prophet's only living descendants. So that also would be an important thing to pay attention to even in Sunni Islam. The Prophet doesn't have any male descendants who survived that we know of. There were some people came forward, but they didn't survive. So in this situation, he is under the protection of first his grandfather, then his uncle. And he is involved in the caravan trade. He does go north and south. He obviously went to Syria, down to Yemen. He's a well-traveled man. He's an experienced man. He's a man of affairs. The fact that he marries a wealthy widow later on shows that he's a successful man of affairs. He knows the world. He's not just someone. I'm going to keep you till 11:15. It's just my nature to get as much out of a class as I can. So don't pack up yet. It's just my, I know some people like to leave at 20 of, but we don't want to shave the university off. We don't have to. Sometimes I might quit, but other times I like to keep going. I think we can keep going a little bit. He's a man of affairs. He's successful. He has to be successful to catch the attention of this rich widow. He's obviously been to the Iraq area as well. He's as much of a cosmopolitan person as you can be. He's traveled everywhere. He's not a bumpkin. He comes from a principal Meccan clan. He has the protection of his clan, or not, I mean, a principal Meccan tribe, Quraysh. He has protection of his clan. He's got a very good track record in business affairs. He marries extremely well, ultimately, if not a young sex kitten. Still, you know, he's not marrying Britney Spears or something like that, but maybe it's more like he's marrying Katharine Hepburn or something. You know, I can't give you the proper parallel there, but he makes a wise choice career-wise. It's a good career move, if you want to call it that. So we know enough about the Prophet to know that much about him. He certainly is not an inexperienced bumpkin. And that's why I don't agree with these characterizations that come from Muslim theology, that the Prophet was unlettered and everything that happened to him was miraculous. To my mind, that is selling him short in favor of trying to show what a miraculous thing, because the Muslims don't really like miracles. But the only they don't like the miracle surrounding Jesus. The only miracles they really recognize is the miracle of the Koran. So to enlarge that, to give that more prominence, to spotlight it as it were, they want to make the Prophet seem, to my mind, not stupider, but more inexperienced, more unskilled than he actually was. So they call him unlettered, meaning he couldn't read or write. And therefore, that makes the miracle of the Koran that much greater. But look, back in those days, when people knew how to recite things, and we are reciting the Koran after all, the poets of that time, and Muhammad is not considered a poet by Muslims because they don't want to identify him with the poet, but he has everything in common with poets in the sense that he recites verses, and these verses have a certain rhyming aspect to them and a rhythm, and they are easily memorized, and you see Muslims do memorize the Koran and recite it, and some memorize it all by heart. So he is a successful word presenter, and maybe the angel is what they want to say. He couldn't do this himself. They said an angel had to do it. Okay, maybe. But he is, oral tradition does not require you to read and write well to be a good poet. Just go to the hills of the Appalachia and see all the musicians that come out of there. I think I mentioned that to you. All the fiddlers, all the singers, all the tremendous musicians, to show you that you don't have to be trained in music to know how to do music. In fact, some of the greatest musicians, you know, Blind Lemon Jefferson, Lead Belly, all these people, they're not trained in music. All the jazz musicians, they just pick it up, man. And if you come from a world of poetry or rhyme prose recital, you don't have to be a skilled practitioner in this to pick this up if it's in the tradition of your family. Another point, anyone who's successful in commerce certainly has to be able to give a receipt. Read a receipt and give a receipt. So I've made this point before, but I do honestly think, regardless of the claim that he's unlettered, that the Prophet was not totally uneducated. That is, that he could write receipts and take receipts and read receipts. I don't think he went to Oxford University or Al-Azhar or even Cal State Long Beach, though I think he's probably not as ignorant as most of us here. But I don't think he had a great formal training, but I think he's a sophisticated person. I think he's a very sophisticated person, far more sophisticated than the average Bedouin of his time. And this would come through his training. Now, if you look at his writings, I'm going to finish now in a minute. Don't worry, I'm going to finish. If you look at his writings, you will see that he does know the biblical stories. They say, he, the angel, someone knows the biblical stories. But he doesn't show evidence of knowing the biblical stories direct from manuscript form. That is, he doesn't put the biblical stories into his narrations and his soliloquies in a precise manner as they're in the Bible. So, again, the angel may be doing this, or he is receiving information in an oral manner and retaining it from memory. So the fact that he didn't maybe read or write has some basis in that context, that he doesn't read or write these stories as such from a manuscript like a monk would do sitting in a cell next to him. but he does have information about the stories that could easily come from people. When you're on the caravan trade and you meet Jews and Christians and you're in the campfires, you got 30 or 40 days in the desert and you got nothing to do and you're around the campfire, people recite stuff and they read stuff. And I'm sure that he was exposed to these materials in an oral fashion in some way on these various travels that he took. And I don't think he's just operating in a vacuum as the Muslim thing. Now, I give you the Muslim view. I told you what they think. It doesn't mean that I have to accept that. I'm an academic. And I think that he shows clear evidence, not of reading reception of stories, but oral memory reception of stories. And that will come out in some of the odd ways that these stories are transmitted or expressed. That is, sometimes they show the work of memory over them, and I'll show you instances where memory has either mixed things up or fallen down or caused some other odd thing to occur in the story. See you. Sorry to keep you over the 45. I am 1 minute over, I apologize. I'll try to keep myself back in the future. I just wanted to hurry up and get moving in this class.